as I climbed up the ladder at work, as I gained more power, jerks became a more difficult problem for me to navigate. Most of us engage in a lot of behaviors that are not only kind of bad for other people around us, but are actually bad for ourselves as well. And that there's very little self-awareness around this issue. And kind of more importantly, no one is trained on how to deal with this stuff. People who are very good at their jobs are often overwhelmed with these problems and feel, just really underskilled with how to deal with them.
Business casual.
From Morning Brew, this is Business Casual, bringing you conversations with people you know, and some you may not know yet, to make business less intimidating. Because money talks, but it does not have to be dull. I'm your host, Nora Ali. Now let's get down to business. I think it's safe to say that whatever business you're in, you've probably had to deal with a jerk at some point. Someone who makes your day-to-day tasks a little, or a lot, more stressful. I've worked with people who take credit for others' work and end up getting promoted. I've dealt with micromanaging managers, even people who are just mean and critical for absolutely no reason. And how you deal with the jerks you encounter, whether they're a coworker or a manager, can have a huge impact on your career. Today's guest, NYU psychology professor Tessa West, told us that when she began her career, she was naive about other people's behavior and gave them the benefit of the doubt. But as she continued to build her career, she realized that people are way less self-aware about their behavior than she initially believed. And she recognized that no one is really trained to deal with bad behavior at work. Half the difficulty in dealing with jerks isn't so much confronting or avoiding them, it's getting the people in power to care. Tessa West's new book, Jerks at Work, Toxic Coworkers and What to Do About Them, is filled with strategies to do just that. Tessa offered ways to deal with jerky coworkers that go beyond confrontation. She told us what gaslighting actually looks like at work, how to spot the credit stealers, and how to know when to speak up. I found this conversation to be incredibly relatable with action items that I will take into my work life. And I hope you also find some tips and tricks to make your work a little more enjoyable. That's next after the break. Today's episode of Business Casual is sponsored by Real Vision. Investment advice can feel a bit fickle. The advice that makes sense today might not be what you want or need to hear tomorrow. But the new Real Investing course from Real Vision aims to change that with timeless investing principles from the world's best investors. The Real Investing course will give you the tools and foundation you need to be a smarter, more confident investor today, tomorrow, and always. Now that's something we can get behind. You'll learn how to think like a seasoned investor and understand how they execute trades and manage positions and how you can tailor those investing strategies to make them your own. Join this financial education revolution today and get access to the Real Investing course at realvision.com/education. Tessa, welcome to the podcast. Excited to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So there's a lot of jerks at work that I've experienced in my life, and I had totally forgotten about them until I was doing research for this conversation, so thank you for that. Before we jump in to the conversation around your book and jerks at work, I'd love to start with an icebreaker, and this is actually quite appropriate for this conversation. So this is a segment we're calling Professional Pet Peeves. So I'd like to ask you, if you could wave a magic wand and get rid of one uniquely accepted professional courtesy or thing that we do at work, what would that thing be?
That thing would be having no inner monologue. So people who don't think of a question before they say it, they spend 2 to 3 minutes kind of thinking out loud before they get to the question. If I could wave a magic wand and make everyone put that process in their head instead of out of their mouths, that is what I would do.
That's a unique one. And that's not just for work. That's in everyday life.
Yes.
I wish people would just think before you speak. It's that simple, folks. Okay, so let's get into the book itself. You decided to write this book during a time when, a lot of us are reconsidering what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a good coworker. What interested you specifically about jerks and jerky behavior?
I think it's a little bit of me search combined with what I actually do for a living. So, I realized as I climbed up the ladder at work, as I gained more power, Jerks became a more difficult problem for me to navigate. So when I was brand new at the job, I was a brand new assistant professor. I sold men's shoes at Nordstrom's when I first started. I was really naive about other people's behavior. I thought they had more perspective taking. They were kinder. They actually cared about how their own current actions affected their future selves. And as I kind of climbed the ladder, I just really realized I dramatically overestimated all of those things. That most of us engage in a lot of behaviors that are not only kind of bad for other people around us, but are actually bad for ourselves as well. And that there's very little self-awareness around this issue. And kind of more importantly, no one is trained on how to deal with this stuff. So, I've been a professor for almost 16 years. I have never taken one class, one workshop on how to handle conflict at work. And I think, I'm in the majority. And a lot of people I talk to say, I just don't have any skills. I don't know how to handle this low-level stuff. I can report the big stuff to HR, but the low-level stuff, not so much. And so people who are very good at their jobs are often overwhelmed with these problems and feel, just really underskilled with how to deal with them.
And there's so much resources on how to deal with interpersonal conflict when it comes to family and romantic relationships, but we spend most of our time at work, so that is sad that doesn't exist. But what I love about the book is that it's these solutions for how to deal with jerks, not just how to ignore them, how to address the situation head on. But is there a particularly memorable or traumatic personal experience you had dealing with a jerk at work that was maybe an instigator in some ways of actually writing the book?
Absolutely. I think kind of the biggest jerk that really caught me off guard is someone who inspired the Kiss Up, Kick Down chapter. So I worked in sales. If anyone's ever worked in sales, you know how cutthroat it is and how people will do anything to just sell an extra pair of expensive shoes to someone. It's a little bit nuts, but it's commission based. And what really surprised me about this person was how two-faced he was, how he was actually quite good at his job. He had the highest numbers. All the bosses really loved him because he had the things that people care about for success at work. He had the numbers. He met those goalposts, all those things. But behind the scenes, he was really mean and conniving and vindictive. And I really realized that most workplaces either ignore this kind of stuff or they inadvertently encourage it by kind of looking the other way when someone does these things to get ahead. And I think what really shocked me about this situation wasn't so much that he was a jerk. I mean, I dealt with people like him in high school. It wasn't that unusual. It's how management dealt with him and how irritated they were with me when I actually complained about this person. So it took me a while to realize that half of the difficulty dealing with jerks isn't so much confronting them or avoiding them. It's getting the people in power to care. And that was really kind of my wake-up call to that's half the battle, is learning those strategies, not just confrontation.
To that end, how do you convince yourself as a coworker, as an employee, to speak up? I mean, we'll get into the specific types of jerks in a second, but that's the main thing I would be concerned about, is I don't want to be viewed as a complainer. So how do you work up the wherewithal to actually do that?
Yeah, I think it's like that's kind of one of the most important questions. And I think you want to actually kind of take a step back before you speak up and do a little bit of homework first. So one question you want to ask yourself is, how widespread is this behavior? Is it just me? Am I the only person being targeted? Or are there other targets, either currently or in the past? And I think we don't typically think about problems outside of ourselves. We don't think, what other potential employees have encountered this with this person who maybe aren't working here anymore, who've transferred to a different department, or who maybe are dealing with this but are silent. And so figuring out, who else has been victimized, I think is really critical. And I talk in the book a lot about finding allies at work who aren't necessarily your best friends, people who are a little bit at arm's length. And that is kind of the first critical step to learning how and when to speak up and what to say, is knowing who else is being targeted, not just how you feel about it, not just how it's disruptive to you, but what it's doing to the actual organization, to the climate, to the culture. Those are words that managers get scared when they hear. We have a real culture problem on our hands here. We have a revolving door of talent, we're bleeding talent. That's the stuff they care about. And so when you know the answers to those questions, you're much more likely to actually be able to move the needle on, changing this person's behavior, or at least having someone step in and help out.
You got to know the motivations and incentives of your bosses, because it is going to be detrimental to the company if you don't say something. That's a great point. So as I mentioned, I was thinking about the jerks I've interacted with at work in my past in doing research for this. And there's one person that came to mind. He's this mediocre man who failed upwards, just kept getting promoted, promoted. We've all seen it. But he, to me, was 3 of the types of jerks: a gaslighter, a credit stealer, and a free rider.
Yeah.
Amazing. So walk us through what those 7 types of jerks are. Maybe starting with, I think the one that you called the most toxic is the gaslighter, right?
Yeah.
So maybe starting there, and then explain what those other ones are.
So the gaslighter is a special type of jerk because what they do is they lie with the intent of deceiving on a grand scale. So lots of people are dishonest at work. They lie about all kinds of little things throughout the day. But gaslighters are very motivated to create an alternative reality for you. And the reasons why they do this are all over the place, but some of them are kind of surprising. In fact, kind of the most common reason is that they're pretty isolated at work. Nobody likes them, wants to work with them. They're ignored by people in power. And so they lie to kind of keep people around and actually have an active team. So I've seen gaslighters tell people, the only reason why you still work here is because I'm your boss and I put in a good word for you. But in reality, that's not true at all. Most of these people have actually fallen off the radar. No one even knows what they're up to anymore. I mean, all these kinds of lies to either keep a team around or to cover up some unethical behavior like dishonesty or cheating and stealing, these kinds of things. And the way they do this is they socially isolate you. So one of the reasons why it's so painful to be gaslit is because you're cut off from everyone. You don't know what the reality is. You don't know what people actually think of you. You have no idea if people think you're awful and you suck and you shouldn't belong here, or if they don't know anything about you at all, which is actually more often what we see. And so gaslighting is very dangerous. It can make people feel kind of damaged, incompetent, insecure for years and years. And I think they often get away with it because they have, powerful connections. They're well respected at work, and they thrive in workplaces where no one questions authority. If they say things are a certain way, other people in power kind of believe them. There's no kind of up and down system of checks and balances. And so that is, I think, why people who've been gaslit often feel the most psychologically damaged at the end of the experience.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Let's also talk about maybe the credit stealer and free rider, because those two, in my mind, are a little bit similar. But what are they, and what are the differences there?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. In fact, in writing this book, I had a hard time sometimes completely distinguishing them because I do think they have a lot of overlapping traits. So credit stealers tend to be people that you trust. They're your bosses, they're your friends, they're your team members. They're not like randoms that you don't know at work. They're people who you actually go to for advice. And what they do is they either steal credit for your ideas, but more often when you see it coming from a boss, it's for your hard work. The most common situation that I've heard of with credit stealing is a middle manager who has to report to their boss all the things they've accomplished, and they'll often do that by taking the credit of the people on their teams. And so people who are on the receiving end of this feel really helpless for actually complaining about this type of thing. They also take credit for ideas, but ideas are in their air. They're harder to actually identify, who came up with what. And so there's a lot of ambiguity around the behaviors that lead to credit stealing, but the kind of most common is, I did all this great work, check out what I did, and it's really the people, the direct reports who've done that kind of thing, who've done all the work that this person's taking credit for. Free riders are a little bit different in that they don't actually necessarily care about getting individualized credit for work, but they just want to be able to kind of ride the coattails of the team when the team succeeds. So these people tend to be well-liked, they're fun, they have good gossip, they can get dinner reservations. We keep them around because we like them, but they're really good at kind of allocating their work evenly among everybody so no one person really feels the pain. And they will step in at the 11th hour and maybe give a presentation for 5 minutes that makes it look like they've done things. But the hard part about these free riders is a lot of it is actually our fault for allowing them to do it. We make a lot of excuses for them. They target conscientious teams who will just kind of make up for their, laziness. And half the battle is really convincing ourselves on these conscientious teams full of very cohesive people that we need to step in and do something about it. And that's often very uncomfortable and awkward. So we'd rather just kind of deal with it and cover up for them. And they love teams like that because they can get away with it for a very long time.
In that specific scenario then where, the team did all the work and then this other person swoops in and does the presentation, I have seen that many times. But I have hesitated to speak up in those situations because it feels like you're trying to sort of elevate yourself, and it's like, oh no, I want to do the presentation, I want to speak, I want to do this. And I just wonder, how do you speak up in that situation without making it seem like it's all about you, where like you do want the credit, but you don't want to seem like someone who themselves is a jerk as well.
Yeah. I mean, often some of these solutions can kind of put you into this ambiguous jerk territory, right? I think, you got to think about the root of the problem. So with free riders, it's a group problem. It's a team problem. They're taking advantage of all of you. And so the burden should be on everyone on the team to actually help solve the problem, not on one person to stand up and say, I don't want this free rider to negatively affect me. It's actually negatively affecting everyone. So you all need to get together, get on the same page with how you're then going to confront this person and what you're going to do about it. And a lot of this has just to do with systems and processes. Writing down work you agree to do ahead of time, writing down the work you didn't agree to do so you can look at discrepancies, having policies around who's going to do those presentations so that you don't have visible work done by free riders. I think that example is a good one of a lot of the work we do is invisible. No one sees us do it. No one's keeping track of it. What you don't want to happen is allow free riders and credit stealers to do the most visible stuff. That should actually go to the people who are actually also doing the invisible work. There shouldn't be this huge discrepancy there.
I hope bosses are listening to this, because if your workers, your employees don't want to be the ones to speak up, it is oftentimes up to you to say, okay, I identify who's doing the work, and maybe I am the one to encourage these people who normally don't speak up to speak up, and maybe even assign you to be the person to present. So I think that's important as well. Let's take a very quick break. More with Tessa when we come back. Today's Business Casual episode is brought to you by Wealthfront. In today's financial climate, we're all looking to save some money any way we can, right? And what's even better than saving money? Free money. So if you're keeping cash anywhere that isn't paying you a high interest rate, listen up. Wealthfront is a saving and investing app that can help you earn more on your money and build wealth for your future. The Wealthfront Cash Account gives everyone a 1.4% APY interest rate, which is a whopping 20 times more than what traditional banks pay. There are already nearly 500,000 people using Wealthfront to save more, earn more, and build long-term wealth. So why wait? Earn 1.4% on your cash today. And if you start now, you'll get a free $50 bonus with a $500 deposit. Visit wealthfront.com/casual to get started. That's wealthfront.com/casual. This no-brainer good news has been a paid endorsement from Wealthfront. So Tessa, I'm just going through all these jerks in my head. And one person that I remember, I was an intern on a training floor at a Wall Street bank, and part of the internship, like the goal of the internship, is to get a full-time offer by the end of the summer.
Yeah.
And this one person on the team of 10 people, everyone liked me. This one person took me into a room and said, I'm not going to vouch for you because I just don't like you. That was the feedback. That was it, period. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, what did I do? And he said, I just don't like you. So my question around that is, how do you give feedback? Because I know you have a framework for feedback where you don't end up just saying, where you don't just end up attacking someone's character. Because I think that could happen if you're trying to approach a jerk, where you might end up saying something like, I just don't like how you operate. So what is the right approach for feedback in that case?
I hate feedback that is broad and is about character. I think, giving that kind of feedback, I don't trust you, I don't like you, asking for that kind of feedback, what do you think of me? Am I nice? Am I fun? It's completely useless. It's useless in marriages and relationships. It's useless at work. Feedback needs to be specific, and it needs to be about behaviors. It can't be about how you feel. It needs to be about what people do. And I think we learn a lot about expressing our feelings and our emotions and our thoughts. And I think that's all great, but it's not productive at work most of the time. So, my comeback, if I got that kind of feedback, I was told to smile more at work, that people would like me more if I smiled more. It's just easy for me to label that as sexism. But I actually do think there was something useful embedded very deep into that comment, which is sometimes you come across as a little harsh, but I wanted the specifics. What exactly did I do that makes people feel like I'm not welcoming, or, I'm not warm, like removing all the gender stereotypes here. So I think the more we just give really specific feedback immediately after things have happened. So I give a presentation and I give someone feedback, or I ask for feedback. How was the timing of that? How was the level of detail? Is there anything I left out? Or with bosses, did I give you enough time? Did I give you too much time? Was the feedback I gave too detail focused? Was it too broad? Very specific questions that are around behaviors not only are more useful because you can actually build upon them, it's also less threatening. So when you hear feedback, I don't like you, your defenses went up and said, what is this person's problem? I didn't do anything to this person. Well, maybe you gave him side eye once in the elevator. Like, who the hell knows, right? There's a million things you could have done. Maybe some of them were rude and you didn't realize it. But the point is, you're never going to know because that feedback is not useful. It comes across as sexist and it just is mean. So I think specific, frequent feedback, both for givers and askers, that are about behaviors, not about your feelings. And this is really, really hard to do, especially if you're dealing with a micromanager or a credit stealer where you have a lot of feels and you want to talk about those feels. Save those for a happy hour with your friends. Write down specifics and document them, date and time stamped as much as you can to kind of get around that kind of nastiness that just isn't effective at work.
This story did have a happy ending. I did get the job, and that guy left the company before I joined full time, so it was perfect. It worked out really nicely. So going back to the timing of the feedback, as you mentioned, how as a manager do you initiate the feedback? Because we've all been there where we get a Slack message, hey, do you have 5 minutes from your boss? And you just sit there and you dread it. Or they put an empty meeting on your calendar. We've seen that so many times. So how do you actually initiate that conversation as someone who's giving the feedback?
So I think there's a couple pointers here. One, I've written an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, on how you should never write an email that says, hey, can I meet with you for 5 minutes if you're a boss? People will lose days and days of sleep. Yes. It will rise their blood pressure. Uncertainty is the biggest source of stress and anxiety. And if it's coming from the top down, from someone in power, it will destroy you, And once you can physically feel stress, then it's really bad. Because actually most stress you can't actually, cognitively process. But once you can feel it, it's bad. So don't do that. Instead, say exactly what the feedback is about. Hey, can I meet with you for 5 minutes? It's about your presentation. I just want to give you a couple pointers on things you could improve. No big deal. So be very clear in your communications. I actually think that the best type of feedback isn't formal and it isn't structured. We don't wait until the end of the quarter to do it. It's not 360. I actually think that kind of feedback is completely useless because it's never actually, anonymous, and people lie and they forget. So, make it informal. One thing that we actually know from social psychology is that context really matters. So if you want to give someone feedback, they're intimidated, they're scared, they're nervous, take it outside your office and go for a walk. Grab a cup of coffee. The minute you're behind that desk and they're sitting in front of you in that kind of corner office situation, all those contextual cues is going to make that person freak out. So remove that power dynamic. Take yourselves out of that room. Go to a conference room where you're face to face next to each other. You're removing these power cues and make it informal and make it frequent and don't make a big deal out of it. I think even kind of every time someone gives a presentation or they're doing something important at work, you always set aside 10 minutes for an immediate feedback conversation. That's great because people get used to it and they stop getting nervous about it. The minute you formalize it, put on a calendar and don't say what it's about, uncertainty rises, threat rises, that evaluation apprehension, that feeling of like, uh-oh, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to get fired? How bad was it? Perseverative thinking. You want to remove all that from the equation, and there's a couple little simple things you can do to do that.
Yeah, that resonates with me so hard. Uncertainty is the biggest source of stress and anxiety. When you don't know what it's going to be, if you know it's going to be maybe negative feedback and it happens quickly, fine. But if you don't know what it's going to be and you're sitting on it, then that's really stressful. Yeah. So you alluded to this a little bit, but I want to flip it now. If you have a toxic manager or one of your types of jerks is a micromanager, for example, how do you address that feedback, especially in a time where we're not in the office as much with our managers, and micromanaging might look different if it's happening over just Slack and email. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's sort of the modality of how we communicate matters a lot. I think, sort of one piece of advice I give people is, especially if you're working remotely, the more cues you can have when you're communicating, the better. So email is the least amount of cues. You don't see people's faces, you don't hear tone of voice, you just see typed words. Better is phone, but even better is face-to-face. if you want to do it on, something like this or Zoom or whatever, that's fine. People do tend to stare at themselves more than they do another person, especially if they're nervous. So anything you can do to kind of increase the amount of nonverbal communication where people can see each other, they can read each other's signals, they can hear each other's tone of voice, that's really critical. I think with micromanagers, often, and a lot of managers, anytime we're giving negative upward feedback, which, let's just be honest, is impossible and really stressful. I think the reason why it's really hard is because we have an instinct to lead with a problem. The problem is that you smother me and I don't have enough time and I'm not getting anything done. Instead, we should actually lead with a bigger issue that both of us are suffering from, which is we're not accomplishing goals. What goals are we not accomplishing? What are my goals? What are my manager's goals? Clearly we're having some alignment issues around getting those goals accomplished. And what can we both do to kind of improve that? And I think often with feedback like this, starting with someone's things you want them to do more of is the best strategy. And it's hard to do this, and it's uncomfortable, and often there's nothing that we like that they do, but you just gotta find something and lead with this conversation of, I just want to start with, I really like the level of detail. I realize a lot of managers here don't give that kind of detail. I'm very fortunate that you care so much. That I really appreciate. But I do feel like you and I aren't quite aligned on our big picture goals because we're not accomplishing everything we want to accomplish in the time frame we want. Let's maybe take a step back and figure out what's going on here and what we can do to kind of fix it. Really involving both people and not pointing fingers. You do this, you do that. I'm on the receiving end. I feel this, I feel that. That tends to be the pattern we get into in fights in our marriages and the pattern we get into in fights with our bosses. So you really got to break that as much as you possibly can. And then at the end of these conversations, ask for feedback, which nobody does. Do you have any feedback for me? Are there things I could be doing differently? And people are usually kind of taken aback by this because they don't expect it. But once you do that and people know you're going to do that, they're much more comfortable because they're like, oh, it's going to be my turn soon, and they're much more open with actually receiving feedback, knowing they're also going to get to give some in a little bit of time.
Yeah, but you have to be open to receiving that feedback at the end of the conversation yourself, because I know some people will ask for it and just not actually want it, and then that creates
you don't want it. Nobody wants it. I mean, I don't read my book reviews because I don't want that. It's already written. What can I do? I
exactly,
get that. Yeah. No one wants it. But if you ask for it and it's specific and it's small and it's frequent, it's not that bad. And, the best thing managers can do is showcase that behavior so that other people start to do it. It becomes normative in the workplace.
Let's take another quick break. More with Tessa when we return. Today's episode of Business Casual is sponsored by Electric. Is subpar IT support holding your company and your profits back? Let Electric be the IT spark your company needs. With lightning-fast, chat-based tech support, Electric is helping small and medium businesses save 50% on IT with a whopping 105% ROI. Electric integrates into Slack and Microsoft Teams, so the help you need is just a click away. Bonus time. If you're an IT decision maker at a company with 10 to 500 employees, Electric will gift you a free Yeti cooler when you take a qualified meeting with them. Schedule your demo at electric.ai/businesscasual. That's electric.ai/businesscasual. Tessa, we've been talking about bosses, mostly touched on sort of the toxic micromanaging boss, but you also have this notion of the neglectful boss. So let me read a quote from your book. You wrote, "Neglect is in the air these days. Bosses feel overworked and pulled in a million directions. Burnout is at the highest it's ever been among all employees, and it's particularly high among managers who are often expected to juggle numerous tasks at once, often without clear expectations of what they should focus on most." So what is a neglectful boss, and why can this be so damaging?
So neglectful bosses are sort of this kind of ironic combination of micromanagement and neglect. So most of them are not neglectful all the time. So if they're never paying attention, they would have been fired because they're not meeting their benchmarks. What most of them do is disappear for long periods of time, often because they're off micromanaging someone else. They panic, they freak out, they show up at the 11th hour, they exert a whole bunch of top-down control over you. They micromanage you. They don't actually know what's going on, but it makes them feel better to micromanage. It's more about like regulating their emotions than it is about your actual actions. They do this, it kind of relieves some of the stress, and then they disappear again. Sometimes they show back up in 1 or 2 days to check on the work that they've, randomly told you to do, but most of the time they don't. And so they create a lot of uncertainty, and they create a lot of these kind of spikes of stress where you don't know when they're going to show up. You don't know what they're going to demand. You don't know if it's worth it to show up at 7 a.m. for that meeting, or if they will have forgotten about it by the time, the meeting actually rolls around. So people with neglectful bosses are obsessed with their bosses. Ironically, those that are getting the least amount of attention think about their bosses the most, because they're always worried. They're going to hear the sound of their footsteps down the hall. They're going to get that Slack ping. I need to talk to you immediately. This project isn't ready. You're like, it's going out in an hour. Well, get a delay. We all
I'm having
know what
heart
this
palpitations just hearing you say that.
Tell the client we need more time. Well, the client needs it now. I don't care. You figure it out. That kind of thing. And it has nothing to do with you, but you're thinking to yourself, what did I do to deserve this? Nothing. You didn't do anything to deserve this. And a lot of that neglect kind of comes from micromanagement, but also a lot of it comes from managers who spend most of their time reporting to their managers. So they have very little time for you. And then when they do show up, they freak out. I think, that's the general pattern we see with these folks.
For all of these types of jerks, it feels like maybe because we're working remotely, hybrid work, it's easier in some ways for jerks to slip through the cracks because you're not really interacting with them face to face. Is there anything you recommend that we as workers do differently to handle jerks at work because of this remote environment, whether it's more record keeping or just being a little bit more intentional with who's assigned to what? What are some of those tips that might be different now than they were a few years ago?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, and it's interesting that your intuition is that they're slipping through the cracks. A lot of other people think, oh, jerks aren't as much of a problem because we're not seeing them as much. I think you're right. I think they are slipping through the cracks. I think there's a couple key things that we should do that really involve solutions. And so, one thing we've seen with this remote work is that people are very siloed off. They only talk to the same 3 or 4 people every day. It's very much kind of focusing on getting the work done. They're not networking as much, so they don't have those connections. There's this concept called embeddedness that we know actually predicts whether people are engaged at work and whether they stay in jobs. And it's kind of like, if you think about work as like a spider web, how much are you stuck in that web? And in remote work, we aren't stuck in the web at all because we don't have these strong social connections. We maybe are connected to 3 or 4 people. Our work lives and our home lives have become very separate. So I think kind of the solution to dealing with jerks is often breaking that and socializing more, networking more. And if you do spend any time at work, it needs to not be on getting jobs done. It needs to be on social networking. It needs to be on meeting managers who you don't report to but are friends with your manager, so that you can go up and over if you need help or advice on dealing with a difficult boss. It's, forming connections with employees who also report to the same person as you but are maybe on different teams or have different roles. That social networking piece, I think, is something that we have to prioritize when we work from home, because those relationships really buffer you from these types of jerks at work. I think, and the other thing is talking to each other about interpersonal behaviors is really critical as well. We don't do that in remote work. We have our 45-minute meeting. It's task focused. We do the thing. We don't really talk to each other about the interpersonal behaviors that are going on behind the scenes. And I think lastly, because we don't see any of this stuff, we don't see how people are treated when we're not in an office together. Reputational information doesn't get spread in the same ways it used to. We actually have no idea what people's reputations are at work because we don't see them interacting with each other. So you learn more from watching 2 people talk to each other in a meeting than you learn from talking to that person yourself. Are they leaning towards each other? Are they making eye contact? Did they stay an extra 5 minutes to, gossip at the end of that meeting? That reputational information to figure out kind of the hierarchy at work, the structure at work, is completely lost in remote work. And so you have to actually make an effort to do those things on the side to be able to figure out who is good to work with and who's actually a jerk. Without that, we're a little siloed off. We're like working in these vacuums. And that information is really critical to navigating these problems at work.
Let's say you are at a fully remote company, how do you do that on the side? Because early pandemic, I would get invited to Zoom happy hours and like water cooler talk and trying to make it seem like you're in the office and you're not, which obviously doesn't work. So how do you build those social connections if you're working with someone across the country who you may not actually interact with in person ever?
Yeah, I mean, those connections are really hard to form. And I think, doing more Zoom is typically not the solution. We have to mix up the modality. Earlier I said, more information is better, especially for feedback. But sometimes what we actually need to do is go a little more informal than Zoom. So we've associated Zoom with work. It's really hard to have a Zoom conversation with your best friend or with your mom or your cousin. The same is true for work. Just get on the phone, have a chat. Though mixing up the modality is kind of the only way to do it, and I think taking it out of the modality that you use for work is going to be really critical. Even if you just start texting each other, I think is fine. I'm not a big fan of are these Slack channels that are very group based, because they get dominated by minority voices that then create the impression that this is what everybody thinks. And so we should kind of move away from this kind of cliquey Slack channel business that we all kind of got addicted to during this. Go more one-on-one conversations, phone calls, texting chats. If you can have any in-person time, you should prioritize social time at work. I think, but it is really tough because people feel very isolated, especially if they're in different time zones and things like that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, where you might think face-to-face over Zoom or Google Meets is the way to connect socially with your coworkers, but you send them a text, you have a casual phone call, that's so much better because you're not used to interacting that way in the work environment. I really like that. So the end of your book includes some quizzes, which I think is so fun. One of the quizzes asks the question, am I the jerk at work? Everyone likes to think they're not. Without getting into maybe the details of all the questions in the quiz, which, by the way, I thought it'd be pretty obvious which answers would make you not the jerk, but it's very nuanced. So I'm going to have to go back and actually concentrate and take the quiz myself. But how do you know high level if you might be the jerk at work?
So the first thing I tell people is you're not going to know because no one will tell you. So don't expect to sit around and have people come to you with this terrible news that you're the jerk at work. In fact, everyone I've talked to that's realized they were the jerk, it was 10 years after they left a job. They ran into someone at a coffee shop or a restaurant who had moved on and told them, you actually sucked, and I think that can happen to anyone. I think people are not honest in this feedback, partly for all the reasons I talked about earlier, is we just don't know how to give this kind of feedback. So if you think you might be the jerk, you're going to have to learn to read the tea leaves a little bit. So I can tell you about one moment where I realized I had been the jerk. I had done this office move. It was horrible. Academics hate leaving their offices. They stay there for 30 years and squat in there, and all their business is there. And one of my colleagues, a good friend of mine, Madeline, she had been in her office for 30 something years. I moved her and I didn't talk to her about it, and I put her in a space she hated, and she started crying. And this is very not like her. And instead of telling myself, wow, she's oversensitive, grow up, I had to really engage in a little perspective taking and think, what would make Madeline cry? Having no control, feeling like she was pushed into something she didn't choose and didn't like. What did I do? Well, I kind of bulldozed her in this situation. So I read her behavior to figure out what kinds of questions I could then ask her to tell if I was this difficult person at work. I think the worst thing you can do is go to lower power people and ask them if you're a jerk, because they'll all say, no, you're so awesome, everybody loves you. That's not going to work. So asking those specific types of feedback of what you could do, what you should do more of and less of, will give you that information. The other thing that people realize that they're the jerk, and I get a lot of this from recruiters, is recruiters will reach out to past employers or past colleagues, and what they'll get back is crickets. So it's not that they get a bunch of negative feedback about you. It's that they get no feedback about you. So if you're on the job market, like everybody is every 5 minutes these days, and recruiters or new employers are having a hard time getting information on you, it's because you're a jerk. No feedback, no information usually means bad information. It's very risky to gossip about someone, to say negative things about them. You don't know where that's going to take you. You don't know how that's going to, hurt you in the future. So instead, we just ignore the email from the recruiter. That LinkedIn message just goes into the trash bin, because if you have nothing nice to say nothing at all. And that's really kind of the norms of the workplace. So those are kind of the ways in which people realize that they've been difficult. If you're getting these signals, then that's how you probably aren't awesome at work. And you're going to have to start asking for the kinds of specific feedback to help you improve your behaviors. That all said, we can all be jerks. I like to destigmatize it. We all can potentially act crappy at work under the right circumstances. It's all about learning your own weaknesses, your own Achilles heel, and then learning how to navigate around that, creating alternative behaviors when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, when you're being micromanaged by your boss, so that you don't kind of create a contagion of these behaviors at work.
Right. It's also a good reminder not to burn any bridges at your workplaces, because you never know, 2 jobs from now, like you said, 10 years from now, that could come back and turn into crickets from a future employer who's trying to get feedback. And that's happened to me before, where I get a request from a recruiter, can you give feedback on this person? And you're right, I ignore it. That's my approach, instead of providing a negative feedback. Okay, Tessa, we have a couple of bonus questions for you before we let you go.
Sure.
So this first is for a segment called Shoot Your Shot. So this is where we learn about your moonshot idea, your wildest ambition, your biggest dream. This is your chance, Tessa, to shoot your shot. So go for it.
Oh my gosh, my biggest dream. Okay. That is tough. I mean, right now I'm on sabbatical. This is going to sound depressing, but my biggest dream right now is just to have more balance. You know, people ask me what I want to do on sabbatical. Where am I going? Am I writing my next book? My answer is I am going to the gym, and I'm going to the cheap massage place up the street from me. That's where I'm doing my sabbatical. And you know what? I am totally overworked. I have a million side gigs. My dream right now is just to sit on my butt a little bit more or exercise and get more sleep. That's my dream.
Same, though. I just realized that as you said it, I just want to sit on my butt for like a couple days. So Thank you. Thank you for saying it out loud. Well, Tessa, this has been an awesome conversation. I have a better idea of how to just handle coworkers and reflect back on the jerks that I've had in my life. So we appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thanks, you so much for having me.
This is Business Casual, and I'm Nora Ali. You can follow me on Twitter at Nora K. Ali, and I would love to hear from you. If you have ideas for episodes, comments, and thoughts on episodes you loved, fun segment ideas, feel free to shoot me a DM, and I will do my very best to respond. You can also reach the BC team by emailing businesscasual@morningbrew.com or call us. That number is 862-295-1135. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Business Casual on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And if you like the show, please leave us a rating and a review. It really, really helps us. Business Casual is produced by Catherine Millsop and Bella Hutchins. Additional production, sound design, and mixing by Daniel Marcus. Kate Brandt is our fact checker. Sarah Singer is our VP of Multimedia. Music in this episode from Daniel Marcus and the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Thanks for listening to Business Casual. I'm Nora Ali. Keep it business and keep it casual.
Business Casual.
If you like what you saw and you like what you heard, you can listen to the entire episode of this podcast, Business Casual, anywhere you get your podcasts. And please go ahead and subscribe to the Morning Brew YouTube channel, and go ahead and click on that alarm bell, that thing right there, so you can be alerted anytime there's a new video.